Okay, so very quickly, I just want to remind you that although we spend a lot of time talking about how the national government does stuff either for or to the states, the states also have some role in that process. It really is kind of a back and forth. And to give you a couple of examples, remember you'll want to be able to name. Like if you just get 2 examples in your head of all the things we talked about, we want to give you a whole list of them. As long as you have about 2 examples, you'll be good, right? So you can say something specific. So anyway, a couple of examples I can give you for the way the states give back to the federal government is like right now with the election process. So although we're electing the U.S. president and our United States representatives and our United States senators, each individual state runs their own elections, right? They're in charge of deciding who can vote within the restrictions set by the Constitution, of course. They're the ones that decide the registration requirements. They're the ones that decide where the polling places will be. They're the ones that hire all the workers to do that. All of those things are run by the states. Another good example is law enforcement. Although there is the FBI and the U.S. Marshals, most law enforcement occurs at the state and local level, right? So the idea of keeping order and finding people, like even if somebody is like plotting to, like, I don't know, assassinate the president or something, local law enforcement would have a really large role in that process, right? They might be the ones who get the tip, they might do a little bit of investigation and then pass it on to the FBI and so on and so forth. So the states are going to do a lot of things in that way. But okay, so we've talked a lot about what is over here, what we would call vertical federalism, that's between the national government and the states. But then there's this idea of horizontal federalism, and as my beautiful diagram suggests, that's going to be relationships between the states. So, and there's really only 2 big ideas here. These are both in your like there are questions in your Green Constitution, but I wanted to just make sure that we were pretty clear on these 2 ideas. The first one is the notion, as you can see on the board, of privileges and immunities. That's the idea that states have to treat any U.S. citizen basically the same. So just because I'm not a citizen of Oklahoma, if I were to go on vacation in Oklahoma, I have no idea why I would do that, but maybe I would. If I were to go on vacation in Oklahoma and like my car was broken into and I go to report it to the Oklahoma police, they can't say, oh, well, we're not going to investigate your crime. You're not even from here. They have to treat us all the same. You, of course, know that there are some notable exceptions to that, right? The biggest one for you is probably the idea of out-of-state tuition, right? So state universities treat individuals differently based on whether or not they're from that state. But the Supreme Court has in the past ruled that that's like a reasonable exemption, which because the argument is like, technically, if you are paying in-state tuition, your parents have just already paid the difference through their tax dollars, like that you living in the state and their tax dollars supporting the state institutions, and how it works. So that if you're coming out of state, all you're doing by like paying more is like making up for the tax dollars that your parents didn't pay. That's kind of how the Supreme Court sees it. Another good example is like hunting and fishing licenses. If you want to go and hunt and fish somewhere out of state, they have to give you a license. They can't say no, you're not allowed to hunt or fish here, but they can charge you more to do that. And again, it has to do with like their game and conservation fees that would be paid through like taxes in their local base, but you're coming from out of state, so you don't pay those taxes, so they're going to make up for that. So there's that. And then the second big piece of horizontal federalism is a full faith and credit clause. Full faith and credit means that every state has to recognize the legal documents of other states. So to go with my trip to Oklahoma example, if I were driving through Oklahoma on my vacation and I got pulled over for speeding, they can give me a ticket for speeding, of course, but they can't ticket me for driving without a license just because I don't have an Oklahoma driver's license, right? Even if maybe it's easier, I have no idea if this is the case, but even if maybe it's easier to get a driver's license in Texas than it is in Oklahoma, or maybe this isn't true, but there might be some state that has you have to be 17 to get a driver's license, or 18, or whatever it is. That's not a national law, so they might have differences. But if I'm a 16-year-old and I'm legally licensed to drive in Texas and I'm driving in that state, they can't ticket me for not having a valid license because I have to recognize the validity of the Texas state license. Those are the sort of non-controversial ones, but on the board you can see the image, right, of a marriage license, and that is a really controversial one, because only recently has the interpretation of that changed. Up until 2014, so just 2 years ago, in our country there were a few states that provided for and allowed same-sex couples to get marriage licenses in those states. A good example is Massachusetts. They were the first. And so sometimes, not sometimes, often, the Massachusetts marriage license office would have people coming in from all over the country, right? So they would go and take a vacation to Massachusetts just so they could go and apply for and receive a marriage license. But let's say that a same-sex couple were to do that from Texas. They went to Massachusetts, they got a marriage license, they came back here. Well, one of the things a marriage license can do for you is if one spouse falls ill, like in a coma, they can't communicate, they can't say anything. Their spouse is legally in control of their medical care, right? If there's no other like medical power of attorney, their spouse can legally make those decisions for them. But if it's a same-sex couple, even if they have this marriage license from Massachusetts, Texas would not accept that marriage license. And so if the spouse, if one of the two of them is in a coma, the other one would not be allowed to make decisions, and it would go to like the surviving parent or closest next of kin or whatever. So that was really controversial. So 2 years ago, the case is on the board. It's Obergefell v. Hodges. That was 2014. The Supreme Court case of Obergefell v. Hodges. And in that case, the Supreme Court decided, among other things, that because of full faith and credit, states have to recognize the valid marriage licenses of other states, even if those are same-sex marriage licenses. Some states are really upset about that. Maybe you were paying attention last year with Ken Davis in Kentucky and the refusal and all this drama. But in any case, that's what the Supreme Court has said. I'll be personally honest, I have sort of mixed feelings about the whole subject. I think it's kind of complicated on a whole bunch of levels. But constitutionally speaking, it's pretty hard to argue that a marriage license is not a valid legal document, and if it's valid in one state, then it's sort of difficult to make a constitutional argument that it shouldn't be valid in another state. But anyway, so there's that. Okay, so then we're just going to glance at a couple of maps. This one is state welfare benefits. I don't know none of us could find a brown state or a green state. We don't know where they are. And we're extra puzzled because it says there's no state in the 800 to 899 range, which leads you to believe that there must be states in the 700 and 900 range, but we can't find one.
Maybe on the East Coast.
I don't think so, because it gives the numbers for them, and the numbers fall in the wrong category. So I don't know. But anyway, the point of the map is that you can see that the average monthly welfare check for a family of four differs. Right? This is, by the way, really old. This is 2002 graph. But anyway, same basic idea. Here's spending on public education, and can we just take a moment to applaud Texas for not being at the bottom? Good job, Texas. So we're kind of in the middle.
Mississippi.
Yeah, Mississippi and Alabama. No, but Utah and North Dakota, though, y'all really. There's that. And then here's one that I don't like as much. It is important. This is one of the biggest issues of federalism right now. But this map has grades from A to F, which I think is an inherent value judgment. And so A in this case means that it's really easy to access abortions, and F means that it's very difficult. But again, that's kind of a value thing. So there are those who would say, well, A should be no access to abortion and F should be a lot. So anyway, just sort of ignore the sort of bias in the scale and just look at the coloring. And you can see that there are more conservative states, right, where it's more difficult to access abortions, and then there are states where it's easier to access abortions, and kind of make some assumptions about that. So any ideas based on these three graphs, what do we think about, what do we think? I'm not asking you to make a conclusion about any individual, that's why I keep clicking. I'm not, it's sort of not an individual question, but overall, what about federalism leads to this? Is it good? Is it bad? Are there challenges or problems that you see? Benefits? What do you think? Problems? Why?
Well, especially with the access to abortion, it's kind of a judgment thing. So, for Texas, it's more of a religious belief. But for states like Oregon and Washington, it's not as much. They believe more free speech than most southern states. So there's that.
So is that good or bad? Is it good that the different states can represent their own individual values, by voting those policies in? Or is it bad because it means that if you're in the wrong state, if you're in California and you think abortion is immoral, but your tax dollars support it, or if you're in Texas and you think that abortion is an important human right and you can't access it. So is it good or bad? Yes?
Yes to the state.
Yes to both? Yep.
If you look at the state education graph, if everything was average, that means that in many states that amount of funding would be lower if you averaged it all out. So I think it's better to have it differently. That way, if you do care about education, you can move to a different state. If you really want to.
Yeah, so Jackson is suggesting an idea that you might want to write down. It's called voting with your feet. So there's one idea that one cool thing about federalism is that, look, if you don't like the policies your state has, you can just move. But I would challenge you to look at this graph and like state welfare benefits. Like maybe there are those who believe that Texas does not provide enough in monthly welfare benefits for a family. Oh, that's gonna be really loud in the recording. So maybe you believe that like Texas doesn't have enough, or you're a poor family in Texas and you don't think that you're receiving enough benefits. But are poor families able to vote with their feet? I mean, they're not legally barred from doing so, but if you're living in poverty, you're probably not really able to get up and move your whole family across state lines to seek better benefits. The same thing goes like with access to abortions, right? Can you vote with your feet if you find yourself in need of an abortion and you're in the wrong state? It might not be reasonable to expect that you could just get up and move to a state where it was more available. Based on maybe your financial situation or just the fact that pregnancy doesn't stop, continues and time it becomes a problem. So there's just some interesting issues. What are some other things you noticed? Yep.
For the welfare, does Tennessee have 7 or 17 or
171.
Oh, 171.
What happened to Pennsylvania?
Anyway.
I don't have a whole lot of detail about Pennsylvania, but I think that they do welfare benefits on an individual and not family basis, and so there wasn't a way to include them in the graph because these are family benefits. Any other ideas about the 3 graphs or things that you noticed? Yep.
It sort of seems, in a way, kind of like whenever the national government had control over the Northwest Territory. Like whenever it was just like, yeah, it's the trial ground for democracy. Maybe it's just like, so each state gets to decide how they spend their money and how they go about doing things, and then maybe on a higher scale, a federal scale, at some point down the road, the federal government could adopt things that work better or are better for society as a whole, such as, in my opinion, like whenever the federal government legalized same-sex marriage because it was, in their opinion, better for the whole. So it's just like a testing ground for democracy. So
You guys are a great tag team back there because the other vocabulary phrase I wanted you to know is this idea of we call them laboratories of democracy. That's pretty close there, Mr. Brooks. So the idea of laboratories of democracy is this. A good example is like to look at Colorado right now with their recreational marijuana laws. So they've decriminalized, made legal recreational marijuana. Technically speaking, everybody in Colorado using recreational marijuana is in violation of federal law. So they could, the DEA could come in and prosecute, but they haven't done that so far. And part of the reason is that it might turn out good, right? I know that you guys are teenagers and therefore genetically disposed to tell me that we should legalize marijuana, but it's possible that bad things could happen, right? It could turn out that we could see a spike in other drug use, right? There are some who think that marijuana might be a gateway drug, or we could see an increase in traffic accidents, people driving while high. We could see an increase in problems with child welfare, right? Like if parents are high and are not being able to take care of their children. We could see an increase or a decrease in productivity, so the economic challenges could come, if people are going to work stoned, and that could be problematic. So it could be terrible, right? On the other hand, I'm not sure why that's super funny, but go ahead. On the other hand, it could be great, right? It could turn out that, as many have argued, that recreational marijuana use is no worse than alcohol, and that by legalizing it, we're going to increase tax revenues and decrease the use of law enforcement to try to counteract the people who are using marijuana. And it could be awesome. And guess what? If it's terrible, isn't it great that Colorado did it by themselves? So we don't screw up the whole country with this really bad idea. On the other hand, if it's great, then it will show up in Colorado. And 5 or 10 years from now, if Colorado is doing excellent, we're like, wow, that was no big deal at all. Then other states or eventually the whole country could follow suit. So that's another nice thing about federalism, is that states have the freedom to make some choices and to try things. And we're kind of happy to do that because then we can see if it's a good or a bad idea. Do you have a question or idea?
I was just.
Okay, great. So what I want you to do then, and we're going to stop here in about 5 minutes. I'd like for you to turn to the people in your team and see if you can talk over at least 2 advantages of federalism and 2 disadvantages. This was an FR, I want you to write them in your notes. This was an FRQ question 2 or 3 years ago. I will show you what the College Board said or some good answers here in a second. But I want you to try working together first and see if you can figure that one out.